With all the talk about infectious disease in the media lately, have you ever wondered what infectious disease has killed the most people in all of history? It can be somewhat difficult to answer that question since most of human history occurred in prehistoric times. There is one infectious disease, however, that has killed the most humans in the past 200 years, and as of 2018, continues to be the infectious disease that kills the most people. What disease do you suppose that is? Well, if you answered HIV or malaria or influenza, those would be pretty good guesses. But actually, the infectious disease that has killed the most people in the past 200 years and continues to be the biggest killer of humans is tuberculosis. It is quite possible that tuberculosis, or TB, has been around as long as humans have been around. We do know that it existed in prehistorical times. There is genetic evidence that it existed over 9,000 years ago. So it's been around a lot longer than things like HIV. This chart from 2013 shows the number of tuberculosis deaths over the past 200 years to be at approximately 1 billion people. That's a lot more than smallpox, malaria, the plague, influenza, cholera, and AIDS have killed over the past 200 years. There are some people that seem to think that TB has been eradicated. It's far from being eradicated. Currently, it's estimated that in the entire world, anywhere from 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 people have tuberculosis. Now, when I say that up to 1 in 3 people in the world have tuberculosis, most people who have tuberculosis have latent tuberculosis. A lot of people who have latent tuberculosis don't actually realize they have it. Latent TB doesn't have any symptoms and is not contagious. However, around 1 in 10 cases of latent TB will become active tuberculosis. Active tuberculosis is pretty contagious. On average, one person with active tuberculosis will spread TB to 10 more people, although most of those people will only have latent TB. TB is an airborne disease, and the fact that active TB is so highly contagious is part of the reason why TB has managed to kill so many people. That stated, most of the time when TB is transmitted, it is transmitted not through casual contact, but through more prolonged contact. Without treatment, it's estimated that 50% to 70% of people with active TB will die. Fortunately, however, there is a cure for tuberculosis. The other thing about active tuberculosis is it pretty much always requires the use of multiple antibiotics. And I'm not talking about just for strains that are antibiotic resistant. Even for strains of TB that are not antibiotic resistant, these 4 antibiotics are usually used. The World Health Organization recommends that isoniazid, rifampin, ethambutol, and pyrazinamide all be used in combination for 2 months, and then for an additional 4 months, you would continue to use isoniazid and rifampin. If you only use one antibiotic to treat active tuberculosis, it will quickly develop resistance to that antibiotic. So it always requires a combination of antibiotics. Now, that's not necessarily true for latent tuberculosis. Latent tuberculosis can be treated and cured with just one antibiotic, usually either isoniazid or rifampin. But even with latent tuberculosis, usually people will take 2 antibiotics, usually isoniazid and rifampin, together because that will shorten the amount of time it takes to cure latent TB. With both of those antibiotics, latent TB can be cured in 3 months. With just one of them, it can take up to 9 months. Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the bacteria that causes TB, is a bacteria that is well known for being relatively resistant to antibiotics. Not only can it develop resistance to many antibiotics, but it also is intrinsically resistant to many antibiotics. The reasons for that include the fact that it has a thick, waxy, hydrophobic cell envelope. This cell envelope is also sometimes referred to as a cell wall. It protects the TB bacteria against antiseptics, disinfectant, and antibiotics. TB bacteria also has drug-degrading and drug-modifying enzymes. And that's just in ordinary drug-sensitive TB bacteria. A very dangerous type of tuberculosis is MDR-TB, which is multidrug resistant tuberculosis. This type of tuberculosis is resistant to both rifampin and isoniazid, meaning that it is resistant to the two most powerful anti-tuberculosis medications. So it has to be treated with second-line anti-tuberculosis antibiotics. These medications have a tendency to be less effective, more expensive, and cause more severe side effects than the first-line medications do. And a lot of times it can take up to 2 years to successfully treat MDR-TB. The cure rate for regular TB is well over 90%, but for MDR-TB, it's only around 50%, although there are some sources that say that under ideal conditions, it can be closer to 70%. It's estimated that about 4% of all new cases of tuberculosis are MDR-TB. XTR-TB, or extensively drug-resistant TB, is a subtype of MDR-TB that is even more dangerous. This chart defines XDR-TB as being TB that is not only resistant to the two most powerful anti-TB medications, but also resistant to at least 3 of the second-line TB medications. The World Health Organization defines XDR-TB as TB that is both resistant to the most powerful 2 anti-TB antibiotics, at least 1 fluoroquinolone antibiotic, and at least 1 of the second-line injected antibiotics used to treat TB. There are some types of XDR-TB that are resistant to all known antibiotics, both first-line and second-line, used against tuberculosis, and sometimes this strain of TB is referred to as total drug-resistant TB, although that's not a term that's recognized by the World Health Organization. These strains of highly drug-resistant TB do present a significant challenge in the quest to eradicate tuberculosis from the planet. Thanks very much to my Patreon producer, Lena, aka Lollipop, and my Patreon associate producer, Jammy Joy. Thanks to everyone for supporting my channel, and if you like this video, go ahead and give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and together we shall take over the world. You can also catch me on Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Snapchat at Zorkmid123.